Bucky Irving was spotted wearing a walking boot. The vibes aren't great. If Bucky Irving misses time, Rachaad White would look like an obvious fill-in replacement to me.
We're going to find out which of the two things they're going to do. Are they going to just elevate Rachaad White and then elevate Sean Tucker, and White is Bucky Irving now and Tucker is Rachaad White now? Or do they just flip the two? Or, to put it another way, White stays in his sort of secondary role and Tucker moves in to where Irving was? And I think that's probably what makes more sense.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Greminger. This week, we're going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about some players off to red-hot, fast starts, and can their scoring sustain throughout the season? Should Dynasty managers be looking to buy? Should Dynasty managers be looking to sell? We're going to talk about a couple of players that are off the cold starts. Can they bounce back? We're also going to unpack what Dynasty managers should do with Malik Nabers. And my guest today, one of the sharpest guys around, Mike Schopp of WGR in Buffalo, and also, of course, Ship Chasing, The Deep End, Purple Insider. Mike's everywhere, and Mike, you tread like a fine line. You have a unique perspective on things because you're covering straight up NFL content for most of the week, and you're also a high stakes, high volume fantasy manager and dynasty manager, and every which way best ball high volume, and you're also doing a ton of fantasy football content now. Talk about how you balance it out throughout the week.
Well, the line gets blurry sometimes, and I don't mind. I mean, if I can, you know this, you've been on my radio show many times, Schopp and the Bulldog in Buffalo. We've been on 23 years, so a lot of people have been on many times, but nevertheless, like, as much fantasy as I can impart in there, I'll do as much as I can get away with. And, you know, Theo, like, so often the conversations really are the same.
Yes.
If we're talking about statistics, you know, how productive was a player? There's just certain keywords, certain ways of speaking that are, you know, exclusive to fantasy, which I try to avoid because I don't want my radio listeners to think that I'm sort of over here in this other space only. And, you know, all that matters is statistics. I have always been a numbers guy, so it comes naturally to me to sort of work that way. But, you know, you just sort of put it in certain contexts. You know, was this player good? How do we know? Well, he caught, 110 passes. Obviously, that was good. But whether he's a wide receiver one doesn't necessarily matter to Bills fans who are not playing, fantasy football seriously. So, we make it work.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times I think you nailed it where it's literally the same conversation. Usually when guys are having very successful fantasy football seasons, unless it's some sort of PPR merchant, they're also making an impact for their NFL teams. I think for you've got to be a little more nuanced. You've got to really know the defensive side of the ball, the offensive line, specifically for Buffalo Bills content. I think, Mike, you're the best around, but you're able to cover so much in the NFL space. So hopefully this is going to be a really, really fun one for everyone to listen to today. And we got to start out with Malik Nabers. And I moved Malik Nabers down to wide receiver 6 overall in the Dynasty wide receiver rankings. And at fantasy points, we have you can look at my rankings, John Hanson's rankings, Thomas Tipple's, Ryan Heath, and you can sort by the ranker. And I am currently the lowest on Malik Nabers from a positional standpoint of any single ranker here. And I got into it a little bit with our buddies at Dynasty Points, and those guys are super sharp. Their whole show this week was talking about the Nabers outcome and sort of don't panic. This is an asset you really need to hold. But Mike, I know a lot of times in these, especially these high stakes leagues we play in, these FFPC leagues, you don't have that sort of flexibility. Your windows to win are not ever expanding. They're usually a finite. And there's a couple of guys on your team, on a Nabers team you might have, where this could be their best possible year. Their window could be shutting this year in 2026. And you're in a position where you can't really be left holding the bag. If I was like a top 3, top 4 scoring team with a chance to win it, I don't think I can just sit there with Nabers. Now, certain teams might have like 5 or 6 strong wide receivers, and then you could say I'm going to kind of stomach it, see where this thing goes.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, even though Nabers might be, I think if Nabers was eligible in the 2026 rookie drafts, I think we'd all be taking him number 1 at the top. I don't think that's a big question mark now with respect to guys like Jordan Tyson and Jeremiah Love. Like, Nabers is going to be considered ahead of him in Dynasty. But for me, it's like we've got 10 weeks left and we've got to get it going. You have a big Malik Nabers team. What are you thinking you're going to do with it? And give a little context to the team situation.
In my case, it happens to be a really good team starting lineup wise, but very little depth. What I like to do in Dynasty is just pile up the young running backs and then, sort of spin the wheel and see which guys show up. And you might want it to be Bajal Tootin, but instead it's Woody Marks or whatever. Like, you do the best you can. I learned this from Scott Connor a few years ago. Just sort of pile up the rookie running backs, as many as you can accrue, and then see what happens, see what comes, because it's so unpredictable. So this particular team has Nabers, but the lineup's unbelievable, but it's so thin that when I looked at it on Monday after his injury, I'm like, oh, well, I guess we're starting Christian Kirk, or we're going to have to do something about this because it's a tri-flex league where you start 3 receivers and there's 2 flex and we just don't run that deep. So it's always funny to me, and this is hard for me too, Theo, like here come the offers, right? I mean, the teams that are got guys that are really all over it. And I respect this. It can be a lot, but I respect the guy, kind of the ambulance chaser on some level, who just comes knocking with like, oh, would you like AJ Brown for Malik Nabers? I'm like, I don't think so. Oh, would you like DK Metcalf? I don't think so. I did get Jefferson in a trade in a different league, which included me throwing a 1, but every league is different. I won that league last year and a couple of other times. And, this is it. Also, it sort of runs through the prism of who your running backs are, because you could be sitting there with Javonte Williams or Dobbins or even like Barkley and Henry at this point. Like, well, what does next year look like? And, am I starting over? I just don't think you want to be. Sorry, it's my dog. I just don't think you want to be in the middle.
I agree with you.
Avoid the middle.
Now, there's a certain argument to be made where, and this one I think I could maybe agree with, where you should hold out for maybe 2 or 3 weeks and see if your team can like tread water, because the last thing you want to do, first of all, I think your trade where you sent Nabers and a 1 to get Jefferson, that one sounds like maybe on paper, I think some of the spreadsheet warriors would say, Mike, that's a slight overpay. But I would say to them, if it's the 112 and you ended up winning the money, then you're not going to care at all.
Right.
You're going to also have a sustainable high-end asset that, splitting hairs, I have them ahead of Nabers now. If you want to have Nabers ahead of them because of the difference in age, that's fine. But Jefferson healthy, Nabers hurt. I also think that we get a little bit of a Nabers, everything is going to go straight up from here because this is the bottom. There's a chance, and I don't think this will be the case because I've been impressed with Jackson Dart, but there's always the chance that Jackson Dart falls flat on his face, and we're less optimistic about Dart in 6 months than we were today. There's also a chance that with some of these major injuries, season enders, that there could be a little bit of a regression, and you could be looking at like a little bit of a slow start from Nabers in 2026. So I think your Jefferson move was great. I've seen a couple of other trades in FFPC leagues. We saw in a 750, it was Malik Nabers and a second for Ashton Genty. Without regards to the positional structure of the team, your thoughts on a deal like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay. I think you've already said it. There's a bias maybe almost toward protecting the player. I mean, Nabers just turned 22. What he did last year was insanely cool and amazing. So, but I think this is one of those where really smart people get a little bit too attached and maybe look down on the players in their league who have been drafting old running backs, because that wasn't really hip. But we're doing that, not necessarily me. Sometimes you're doing that because you're trying to win now. I think win now gets sort of looked down upon a little bit in Dynasty. But here we are going into week 5. And if you're this team I was talking about before is 4-0, kind of what's the point? The point is to win. And maybe you go into next year's draft and, oh, well, I guess I don't have Malik Nabers anymore. Maybe I won, maybe I didn't, but I'm going to try again. And maybe I end up with the Ohio State kid or somebody that's just like as good, or, working trades like, guys like yourself are really good at other ways to get to the result. So, I think you can look at Dynasty like that. And I feel like maybe there's an edge there if you're playing in a room of, quote, experts that are really attached to their young sons, if you will. I think maybe you can sort of zag against those guys and come out all right. So, I don't think the bottom line is I don't think you have to sit with Nabers. If you get St. Brown or somebody who's 4 or 5 years older, or even like 2 or 3 years older for him, and you have a chance to win this year, I say do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I've heard that Amon-Ra St. Brown one sort of floated about. I don't necessarily see those trades going down too often. It does make sense, but it's sort of like Amon-Ra, if it wasn't, and we're recording this, this is going to drop after Thursday Night Football. We're actually recording this on Thursday morning. So we don't know how the Rams 49ers game turned out, but I would guess, Mike, a reasonable bet would be Puka Nacua had another really big game. After Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, might be the best bet to finish as the wide receiver 1 this year. He's had 3 straight weeks of 20 points or more. Lamb's banged up. Jefferson, that offense is sort of stalling a little bit, where Amon-Ra has 6 receiving touchdowns in only 4 weeks. He's like on fire. So I don't know if that's there. A trade that I made was I have a FFPC 500, a contender. I think last year I finished 3rd, a frustrating 3rd. The team has structure, it has balance. I have a million tight ends. Like I'm using tight ends in flex some weeks. Guys like Tucker Kraft on this team, and then a bunch of like really fun tight ends. George Pickens locked in. And then this week I lose not only Malik Nabers, but I lose Tyreek Hill. So my trade was I sent Malik Nabers and I got back Jackson Smith and Jigba and 2 seconds. And for me, I have JSN ahead of consensus now. We did a big positional update ranking over at Fantasy Points, and I have JSN at wide receiver 7 overall in Dynasty. And again, I have Nabers at wide receiver 6 because I'm docking him because of the injury, maybe a little bit more than my colleagues. So for me, this was like a no-brainer one. Your thoughts on a trade like this?
Fine. That's right as we're talking about, kind of the move to make. You know what happens? Like, all right, so say on that team you lose Nabers, you lose Tyreek Hill, and you have Jonathan Taylor, or you have, maybe somebody who's killing it is a little bit younger. What are you supposed to do with them? What are you supposed to do with Pickens if you have a team like that and you're not willing to push? You're not willing to make those trades. Would you just trade them too and just go for 3 or 4 first-round picks? You sort of dump all of it? No, like that's not what I would do. If you have, Josh Allen or somebody on a team like that, you're faced with having to decide if you want to kind of throw the season and, maybe you're 3-1 or something and it doesn't really feel right. I've made this mistake before. You lose a couple of your top guys, like, well, I can't win, so here's everything, and I'll just take draft picks and start over. But these are still players who have a lot of good years left, and you might as well, you might as well make a move. Think about like Brian Thomas before the season or Nico Collins before the season, who were right there around where Nabers, was ranking. And was that really what we expected to have? We're not drafting Nico Collins or Brian Thomas in the first round and redraft right now.
No,
because, we didn't know that Houston's offense would be so dysfunctional, and whatever is going on with Brian Thomas or his wrist or these things happen. And they were right in the Nabers, not necessarily in Dynasty, although Thomas, maybe both of them. I don't know how you rank them. There's so much that you don't know. I feel like, again, to say the same thing, you've got to take your chances and be willing at least to make. Maybe you don't get a good offer, but I think it's worth. You got to be open to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that you have to understand, we don't understand your team context, but I think that the major takeaway is you don't have to trade Malik Nabers, but like Mike says, you have to be open to it. And you do not want to let a championship window close because of an injury. So the chance to win money, in Dynasty, we get so caught up into structure. We get so caught up into these rookie drafts, the way the roster looks, the end of the day, the goal is to win dynasty leagues. And Mike, the way a lot of these pay structures are, if I can win a dynasty league, I've paid for like my next 7-8 years of entry fees. So you have to go for it when it's presented to you. And I think it's a little bit short-sighted to completely dismiss that. Make sure you're checking out everything Mike's putting out. All the ADP chasing stuff over at Ship Chasing, really, really great stuff. And if you're in the Western, I mean, I don't even know how big the scope of things are. Western New York, but how big is the radius of Schopp and the Bulldog, your listenership? Is it like very exclusive to the Buffalo area, or do you see the people from all over that sort of region of the country on you guys?
Yeah, we have a lot of listeners from Southern Ontario and, Western Pennsylvania. But nowadays, I mean, everything's online. So,
yeah,
I remember hearing, this is a long time ago, actually, before maybe we had an app, but listeners in the Philippines and all kinds of faraway places. So, of course, that's not going to be many people who are listening to Bills talk from other countries, but it happens. Now you just get the Odyssey app and you can listen every day.
It's funny because I live on Long Island, and one of my son's friends' dads is a Western New York guy, and we were at a Knicks game, and we had the Buffalo game was on, the playoff game. It was Buffalo versus Denver, and we're just talking about it. He's a huge Bills fan, so he's not paying attention to the Knicks at all. He's just watching the screen, and the Bills were rolling in that one. But I mentioned to him, I'm like, yeah, you're from up there. What, Mike Schopp? That's my guy. He's like, Mike Schopp and the Bulldog. Those guys are the best. So yeah, you are absolutely the voice of the Buffalo Bills. You're my go-to expert. If you want to know anything Bills related, make sure you're following Mike. Everything you've said has just been fantastic. We're going to talk about James Cook in a minute. We have to talk about him every time we pod together.
Right.
2 running backs specifically that are off to very strong starts, Javonte Williams and J.K. Dobbins. And you talk about this one, Mike, where you were saying when you rebuild, a lot of times you're just tossing guys like Dobbins out. Like, I think it was a popular trade last year that Dobbins was healthy. Dobbins was toting the rock for the Chargers. And every single manager with Dobbins was like, I'm going to cash out. I'm going to get my second round pick. Well, if you paid a second for J.K. Dobbins last year, maybe you thought you were getting, half of the season of decent production last year. It's been even better so far this year when it comes to Dobbins. And Dobbins is only 26 years old. Another running back who is surprisingly young, shockingly young, because it feels like we've been talking about him for about 10 years now. Javonte Williams, also off to a very, very strong start. And you mentioned Scott Connor. I had Scott Connor on this show, Dynasty Life, last year, and Scott was mentioning the buy low of Javonte Williams. And I sort of said that's really interesting because nobody's mentioning Javonte. And his takeaway was somebody's going to sign him. He's going to get this opportunity. I don't think Scott in his wildest dreams would have thought 19.2 points per game at this point. And we don't think that that's going to sustain for Javonte. I don't think 19.2 is doable. I don't think RB6 is doable. But when you're off to this red hot a start, all you've got to do is stay healthy. Dobbins is at 14.3 points per game, but he's looking really, really good. Of course, there's other mouths to feed in Denver in that backfield with RJ Harvey. Your thoughts on Javonte and J.K. Dobbins? Are these players you'd be looking to buy in Dynasty right now if you were a contender?
That would be the only way I think I'd want to do that. I mean, 26 sounds young, and we know what he's been through. And RJ Harvey looked really good the other night. Like that's coming. You got to always, not that I need to tell you this, but always remember what framework you're working in. Like in the summer, most of my drafts were best ball. And those are backloaded tournaments where you really want the rookies. And we tend to just dismiss guys like these two by the time we get to the playoffs, let's get to the playoffs somehow. By the time we get to the playoff weeks, they won't even be on the field. There'll be Jaden Blue or Harvey or something else will be happening. But in redraft, I was excited to draft Williams because, I wanted the receivers and maybe tight end premium and maybe elite quarterback. And then you get to Javonte Williams, Tony Pollard, Jaylen Warren, these sort of boring mid running backs. And, for the most part, that's been really good so far. So Williams this is probably some function of how he looked to the Cowboys, but he was also, I think, kind of lucky that they didn't do what most of us thought was an obvious thing and bring in more talent for competition with him. It's Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders, Jaden Blue, and that's the list. And then blue is seemingly, not useful to them so far. And Sanders got hurt and fumbled in the opener, and they lost a close game. So everything has gone right for Williams so far. If you have that good team that needs some running back production, now we're into the bye weeks, more and more injuries. I think you've got to be willing to send that same second-round pick to somebody for this player. Now, he's been so good that maybe the team he's on isn't bad either, because maybe they're winning. But the same principle with Dobbins and all these guys like this. And then you can even get to the blue bloods with Henry and Barkley. And not everybody who's owning these players is that excited about it right now. Yeah. And they might be seeing the end a little bit. This is such a huge week, and next week too, for this kind of activity, because people, we're deciding on what our fate is league to league right now. And the injuries can be too much, or you can sort of be suddenly optimistic. The time that I have to admit I don't give to Dynasty that I really should need to is that time where you sort of open up the whole league's rosters and you go one by one. All right, what is this team's likely goal, expectations, and all this? Is there a trade here? But I'm in too many leagues to have that kind of time. I know if I want to hunt for a player, I can go do that. Or if I want to dump a player, I can go do that. But it's being able to sort of the contextual aspects of your league and who needs what, strengths and weaknesses, that takes a lot more of a time investment. And that's kind of usually where I come up short. But if you can invest that time, you really should.
Yeah, I think that there's a certain amount of, you can just take a look at the standings. If you're in a little bit more of a time crunch when it comes to Dynasty, I think taking a look at the standings and sort of wartime profiteering would be a good way of putting it, where these teams that are in a really bad shape, you don't necessarily need to pick off their best piece, but there's certain pieces on their roster that you can pick off, like the utility of using a guy like Keenan Allen. If he happens to be on a bottom 3 roster, the price for him is going to be really cheap for you. And certainly even a Devontae Adams, if he's on a bottom 4 roster, because of his age, he's going to be a little bit cheaper. And on the flip side, if you are looking to unload some pieces, all you got to do is pay attention to the teams at the top, because when you're at the very top of some of these dynasty leagues, a lot of times the way the dynasty teams seem to structure themselves, there's usually like 3 teams that legitimately have a chance of winning, and they have these massively good rosters. Usually there's a couple of teams sort of in rebuild mode, but those teams might be a little bit more aggressive with trying to separate themselves from the 2 teams at the top. So yeah, Mike, I think in a perfect world, we know each and every team's rosters. But I think if you're in a little time crunch, you just need to know the very top and very bottom at this point. But it's really interesting what you said about just the timing, and people are going to start to really understand what their team is. It's something very funny in the psychological aspect of fantasy football. If you start out a season 1-3, you still have hope on the horizon where you think, I can turn this thing around. I'm 1-3, but the way FFPC frames dynasty leagues, especially, and I know a lot of other dynasty leagues do this, where you get like victory points or whatever you call it, where the scoring matters as well as the head-to-head wins. I can turn things around at 1-3. When I'm at 1-4, I almost feel like that's a really tall mountain to climb. Of course you can do it, but it feels like the psychological aspect of it. It's sort of like a 0-3, I'm okay. 0-5, I'm dead. I'm dead to rights. I'm selling off pieces. So Dynasty is a very, very funny thing.
But it's also, I think maybe your brain takes you to like real football, and it's an 0-3 team have a chance to make the playoffs, and all the statistics on that. It's low percentage. That's 17 games, and we're talking 12. Like you've got 12 weeks. In Kentucky, it's 11. You've got less time. So you have to kind of recalibrate. What is 0-3? What is 1-4? Like, what are these records? And as they say, it gets late early in leagues like that.
No, for sure. And every time we podcast together, we talk about James Cook. It seems like this has been going on for like 4 years. So we're going to do a James Cook check-in. James Cook.
What's left to say?
Look, it looks
right?
Awesome. But I think he's still an interesting player for the context of Dynasty, where you'll see some like variance in the rankings for him, where people just have a slight hesitancy to push him into top 5 running back discussion. So I'll take it off the top. I think that Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, Ashton Genty, because of his equity, his startup value, all those good things, his age. Those three guys off the top are more valuable. Devon Achane, I still have ahead of James Cook, but there's an argument for Achane versus Cook because of the quality of the offenses, especially with the Tyreek Hill loss. Saquon, because he's Saquon, but the age discrepancy, I might even sort of lean into Cook. And then Bucky Irving, now we have a little bit of an injury. And then I'll throw Amarian Hampton's name in there. Like, of all the names I mentioned, sort of where should, and of course, Jonathan Taylor, I'll throw him in the mix too. He's off to a great start. Of all the names I've mentioned, sort of where do you place James Cook from a dynasty lens now that knowing he's got the contract insulation plus the way he looks on an NFL field?
I mean, he's in the conversation, right? That's maybe the bottom of this group is that he's in the conversation with those players. And Taylor, is still doing it. But I still have a tough time because of, I don't know, maybe it's my biases. I never was really in on Cook, and you and I have had these conversations, as you said, for a long time. He belongs in the conversation with these guys. I mean, to say the least, right? What don't we like about Cook? What don't we like? Touchdowns are happening 2 years ago. That was the problem. Well, touchdowns have just through the roof in 20 or so games. But it might be 21 rushing touchdowns in 20 games. Is that good? He's playing more for this Bills team than he had even last year. Like, his snap shares are up, which is a little bit interesting because I don't know if something happened to Ray Davis. I don't have that answer, but Davis is basically not playing at all at this point, and Cook is getting more. They've also been competitive games. Anyway, what elite offense, check, workload, good enough, production, quality of the player, all of it is going well. What's left to say? Like the jury is in on Cook, and anybody investing in him the last 2 years has won big.
Yeah, James Cook, I had a ton of Amarian Hampton, and I traded a Hampton share to get James Cook, Ray Davis, and I think I got 2 seconds in that one. So just goes to show you, like, who do I think is going to score more points this year, despite Amarian Hampton just going through the roof? It's James Cook, I think, is the right answer there. And then who's going to score more points in 2026? Maybe I'd lean to Hampton, but it's going to be, again, pretty close because of that contract insulation.
Yeah.
The only thing that could kind of change the Bills' offensive scope would be if the Bills acquire some sort of far out there proper alpha wide receiver, and they end up getting a Stephon Diggs Stephon Diggs in his prime when Buffalo acquired him years ago type wide receiver that changes the offensive context to a more consolidated wide receiver one getting targets. Other than that, James Cook he thrives playing next to Josh Allen. Josh Allen is as locked in terms of safety for being the quarterback long-term there as any quarterback in the NFL, including Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. So for me, it's James Cook has just settled into this spot. And I still think that there's dynasty managers out there that would trade you James Cook for maybe James Cook plus for the opportunity to get a Bucky Irving, because a lot of people have not adjusted to sort of the new normal with Cook. He was never a guy we wanted to push up the dynasty rankings. And now I think more and more people are sort of capitulating to the fact that you can't rank James Cook running back 15 anymore. He's got to be ranked somewhere in the top 10. And that might even be conservative. Talk about Devon Achane versus James Cook rest of the way this year, because Achane and the Dolphins lose Tyreek Hill. Of course, Achane, the reception total should trend up, but the overall offensive quality could trend down dramatically. Is there an argument for making that sort of pivot trade if you're a contender?
I have a tough time with Miami guys because it's just always feels like they're right on the brink of disaster. Sometimes injuries like the Tyreek injury can somehow bring on positive effects to an offense, not just in the simple sense that the other guys are going to get the ball more, but they're now in a position where they have to change something dramatic about their offense. Or maybe it's just simply replacing Tyreek Hill with Malik Washington and everything's the same, which is okay, fine for Achane, anyway. But their schedule gets lighter. There still is a ceiling for Achane, obviously. What he has that Cook doesn't is, well, Ollie Gordon. Like maybe if Miami's season isn't really all it, then they're looking to mitigate Achane's usage. And, Gordon was a modest, but still a draft investment. And that's another thing the Bills didn't do. Even when Cook was threatening a holdout, they didn't draft any of those guys in a year where it was so rich at running back. The Dolphins did. And if a season goes wrong, then you see, well, let's just put you on the shelf and, we'll just work on next year at this point. So I think there is that risk with Achane, and there really shouldn't be with Cook. I don't want to use that he's durable, but he hasn't missed games. Like that's one thing about his career so far that you like. It's just, I don't want to use it though, because you never know when that can change. Like it is what it is, that so far James Cook, he missed one game last year, and the fact that they are conservative with how much he plays probably helps in this way. They don't overuse him. So, for any given week, the upside with Achane is very alluring. But again, like whatever it is about Cook, we're just bored. I don't know. Like you got to respect what he's done.
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of people sort of are kicking themselves for moving off of James Cook shares. And again, I had a ton of James Cook. We've been doing this for a while. And when it was rookie draft season, I was drafting rookie like James Cook during his rookie year, like over and over again. I remember people sort of getting on me where, Theo, how could you take him over Sky Moore in that spot? And I'm like, well, and that one worked out pretty well for me, Mike. And now I think James Cook, at the end of the day, we wouldn't have thought so at the time, but he's the most valuable member of that entire draft class. If I told you at the time that he's going to be worth more than Breece Hall in Dynasty and worth more than Kenneth Walker in Dynasty, especially early on in their rookie years, you probably would have said you're wrong. But I think we're there. I think James Cook is the most valuable running back from his draft class. James Cook and the Bills this weekend go up against the New England Patriots. Thoughts on TreVeyon Henderson? It seems like maybe this could be the week. And we said it. I said Dwayne McFarland on last week, and we thought last week could be the real breakout week. We're sort of bailed out by a touchdown last week where he scored 12.6 points. He was running back 24. And it's been sort of a slow drip here where running back 25 week 1, running back 35 week 3, running back 24 week 4. The Bills are going to put pressure on New England to score. I think we can walk away from the game plan saying that. The Patriots are going to have to put up a number if they have any hope here. And I think this could be the week where we actually see the touches for Henderson tick up. The Bills have actually been pretty generous in terms of rushing yards allowed as well. Your thoughts on a potential Henderson breakout this week? Your thoughts of Henderson from a sort of a small sample size, not what we paid for when it came down to the ADP price tag for Henderson at the end of the summer?
Not yet. That's right. I think we'll be every week predicting, is this the week? I feel like it's just, there's nothing about the player that gives us any reason to bet against him other than the fact that he's a rookie. And maybe we're talking about pass pro or whatever it is that sometimes holds rookies back. You had a game. I mean, it certainly made sense last week with the Patriots coming off the fumble fest with Stevenson and Gibson against Pittsburgh, but they went right back to those guys. They went right back to Stevenson, and then they won easily. So it wasn't this game that you might think the Bills game Sunday night will be. So it makes sense in that way. I feel like Henderson, he's shown to be explosive. May looks competent. I mean, that offense overall looks nice, for real football, for fantasy, all of it. We just want Henderson to get his slice, and maybe it'll come here. Not just are the Bills a team that make you have to score to keep up, but they're also one of the worst run defenses in the league so far this year. I think only Chicago has given up more rushing yards, and it's by 1 yard. Like the Bills, they've become a team. Next week, it's Bijan Robinson, by the way. They become a team that you really want to start running backs against. Henderson is a tough start because his usage has been limited, but at some point there's going to be a 25-point game, the pass catching element. Maybe it's this week. It does make sense logically.
Do you think that that's an aspect of Buffalo being a run funnel defense, or are they just struggling to hold up against the run? I know NFL teams, sometimes we have to take it in the context where teams are willing to sort of give this up to take this away. Is that the case? Like, and obviously you're watching each and every Bills game probably twice, 3 times, Mike. What is your takeaway from this?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think they're first in the league against the pass and 31st against the run. I mean, the basic principle that we all came around to, which was, not how we used to think about football, but that defending the pass is more important. And the Bills really personify that right now. First in pass defense, 31st in run defense. That's total yards, at least. But still, Ed Oliver has missed games, interior tackle. Matt Milano has missed games, as far as I know, as we speak here on Thursday. They're both iffy for this week. That makes a difference. They also have a couple guys they got in free agency who've been suspended that haven't played yet. It could get different. It could become different as the season goes on. But, we had Kendre Miller ran through them, breaking tackles on a touchdown run on Sunday. If he can do it, I like Kendre Miller, just has never really gotten the chance yet, then anybody can.
Yeah, I picked up a little bit of Kendre Miller this week in some redraft leagues and also some dynasty leagues. He looked really good on that touchdown run. But yeah, I think that from the Bills' perspective, when you look at the grand scheme of things in the AFC, being able to shut down the opposing pass attacks in the playoffs is probably the way to go. But yeah, that Bijan Robinson, let's circle that one. Let's take a quick break. We come back. We're talking about a couple of wide receivers right after this. Mike, got to talk about it because there's a massive turnover when it comes to the fantasy scoring numbers for the second year wide receivers. Nabers is done for the year, and you have slow starts for Ladd McConkey and BTJ. Rome Odunze, though, through the roof. Odunze is probably going to lead all second year wide receivers in scoring, barring an injury. Your thoughts on what you've seen? The Chicago's on a bye this week. Is there a chance we could see things trend up even more for Odunze after the bye?
I think yes. I wonder what they're thinking about DJ Moore at this point, because imagine a clearer path possibly eventually for Odunze if they moved DJ Moore, because you always hear just sort of these kind of rumblings that he's unhappy or they're unhappy or just what it is. A lot of stuff from last year. I wonder if that's realistic, because then Odunze becomes a Buka. He becomes somebody where you've got the talent and you've got the offense. Probably they're going to be in high scoring games, it looks like. And there's just one less important roadblock, one more out of the way if they were to do that. But very exciting start to the season for him, obviously. And I think it's an offense that could get better. It's still a young quarterback. It's still a new coach. So that's exciting. McConkey, I don't know. I mean, is he a must start at this point? They have Washington this week. I feel like he still kind of is, but I mean, it was one catch last week. The offense is mostly working. I wonder about their tackles being hurt now, though, what that means to their passing efficiency. Do you have anything on him that I haven't heard anything on him that individually is a bad sign? It's more just Johnston breaking out and other factors as far as McConkey goes.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to McConkey, the separation is still there. If you go to Fantasy Points data, he's still separating. It's just this is not working. And at the end of the day, I think QJ, it's another great professional segue from yourself, because we're going to talk about QJ in a second. But Ladd, I think you just leave him in the flex category. If you need a flex, start him. But I think it's sort of almost disingenuous for people to think that QJ is not the new number one when we've seen it for an entire month and he has 10 more targets. Ladd McConkey, though, I think that this might be the bottom of the market for Dynasty, where it can't get worse than last week. It's the worst game we've ever seen from him. And I think the marketplace is beating him up so much that I do think you can get 75 cents on the dollar. The problem is he's still really, really expensive in Dynasty. Nobody's selling off just to sell off. But it's not an injury. It's just a target competition here. And I think the real light at the end of the tunnel for McConkey managers is the age of Keenan Allen. He's 33 years old, 32 years old. And Allen, can he hold up the entire season? If Allen goes down, you're going to see McConkey trend up significantly. So I think that's one. The other thing with that's hurting McConkey is you have this true bell cow usage for Omari and Hampton, where they're actually throwing him the ball as well. So there's a lot of factors for McConkey. Your quick thoughts on BTJ? Is BTJ, and Dwayne last week still had BTJ finishing as the wide receiver 13 on the season scoring. So which he's still pretty optimistic on him getting things together. Another sort of not a dead week, but nothing crazy. It was like a 5-catch week for him last week in week 4. Your thoughts on this? Because this is a weird one because the Jaguars are 3-1 and they have a decent chance of going toe to toe with Kansas City and giving them a real threat this week. But BTJ isn't firing and Hunter's not firing for that matter, but they're completely different. Liam Cohen, we thought he'd be the wide receiver whisperer and elevate the wide receiver scoring when it's been completely the opposite. Liam Cohen has really increased the running back scoring, especially for Travis Etienne. Your thoughts on BTJ and sort of what you've seen from these Jaguars?
Yeah, you said it on McConkey, like in terms of dynasty and maneuvering, these are really tough players to extract from other teams, like we don't know if we want to do it for this year's purposes, and the other guy doesn't want to give up yet. It's a sell low for really young, promising receivers. Like the worst trade you could make is to dump on these guys at this point. So these are hard trades to make. I'm only lukewarm in terms of optimism on Thomas and them. At least, like you said, unlike the previous week, we're not all scrutinizing drops and whether his wrist is a problem or whether he's trying, like all these kinds of things we were talking about after week 3. But I just really don't love Lawrence. I mean, I feel like there are still too many examples of plays where the timing is off, uncatchable passes. And where does that leave Thomas? Now, Nabers and Garrett Wilson have played in offenses where it was likewise and have still put up monster seasons. And that's also Thomas last year. It was really when Mac Jones was the quarterback that flourished the most. And Etienne is the story of that team so far. I think that was such an unpopular pick in the summer that they're just going to move on. I was into Tootin like so many of us. And so far it's just been the Etienne show. So, Thomas is really good. We know that, but the offense, they're winning so far through other means, and Hunter will still come. I mean, Hunter at some point is going to be more of a factor in target share and production for those wide receivers. I don't love it.
Yeah, I don't love it either. I think BTJ, there's always a chance, Mike, that we have seen his highest scoring season as a professional last year, where people hate hearing that. And I hate even thinking about it with BTJ because I have a great deal of BTJ exposure in Dynasty. This is not a guy that's going to fall apart. And certainly there's a chance that he could end up being a top 3 wide receiver scorer next year and sort of a post-hype sleeper, so to speak. I just don't necessarily see it coming together this year to the extent that we want it to. I think where Dwayne had him would actually be a really big win. I think all the BTJ managers out there would say, hey, if you're giving me borderline wide receiver 1 production for the rest of the season, we will take that all day long, even though we were sort of hoping for that top 3, top 4 wide receiver scoring. The Lawrence one is interesting too, because 2026 outlook for BTJ is going to involve Trevor Lawrence because they've traded away all those draft picks. There's not really a pivot that Jacksonville could make aside from taking on some dusty veteran quarterback saying, hey, let's just see if this works. Maybe there's a chance that there's a Daniel Jones type situation where they at least bring in competition. Doesn't seem like it though. Organizationally, they seem to like Lawrence. So you're sort of stuck with him. Your thoughts on, I'll give you a scenario, BTJ or Drake London in Dynasty.
London, I've been thinking about London while we're talking. By the time we got to the end of the season, the draft season, I was in Kentucky for those drafts, and I'm sitting there at the 111. It's like my last draft of the year almost. Like, who do I really want? Because we've been through it all. Collins and Thomas and Nabers and Puka and all these guys, Genty, all those guys, McCaffrey. I sat there at 111. It came to be my turn. And like, who I really want here is London. Like, this is the player I want. This is the player I think that's the combination of the upside and the floor. Like, sort of, this is my bet. And, so far, so good on him, I would say. And maybe that gets better too. The quarterback's been up and down. So I like London a lot. I mean, they're on bye this week. Then they have the Bills next Monday night. Atlanta, it's a winnable division. What Bijan Robinson is doing looks great. I think with London, wouldn't Scott Barrett make the point that like he needs Mooney off the field to have like the high ceiling, but that
Scott-
happens
Scott's-
sometimes.
Scott's secretly a huge Darnell Mooney guy. We've gotten into this all summer long. We had so many sharp people like yourself on School of Scott, and Rich Rebar. All these guys were into London, and Scott would always bring up the Darnell Mooney stuff. And I think that my one fear with Atlanta is Penix is sort of a Jared Goff like light, where Penix does really well in the home environments, and then maybe it's an indoor environments thing. Maybe it's a home environment thing. Again, with Penix, we don't have really a long sample size of him as a starter. He had, I believe it was 3 or 4 starts to end last year. And then this year, of course, through 4 weeks. But week 1 and week 4, London had his 2 highest targeted games. And then we had Penix, of course, with his 2 highest passing totals. Penix looked really good against Washington. Also in week 1, he had some really good moments against Minnesota. And then we had 2 sort of duds in the middle. Yep. They come back and they play your Buffalo Bills, like you said, in week 6. That's going to be a really tilting one. Can Atlanta sort of trend things up heading through the bye week and use that momentum from the Washington win? I like London a lot. I think I've always been like, I talked about London as sort of my guy this summer. I give it a sort of a B. And it's not because of the quality of play, but it's because of the process where if you were identifying a second round wide receiver, he's so much further ahead of Lad McConkey, AJ Brown. And for that matter, I'd much rather have Drake London than Nico Collins right now. So London, I feel like, was a B from the process, that he was the best in his range, but definitely can't go past a B because the production is not there. But again, really good week 4 from Drake London. I just hope that we get more consistency coming off the bye week, because I think London does have a lot of room to run as a guy who's going to sap up targets and be the main focal point of this offense. So I am less concerned about Darnell Mooney than Scott Barrett. That is for sure there. Let's talk about this Tampa Bay situation. We're recording this again on Thursday morning, and there's some real pessimism in the fantasy community about Bucky Irving. Was spotted wearing a walking boot. The vibes aren't great. If Bucky Irving misses time, Rachaad White would look like an obvious fill-in replacement to me. We've seen Rachaad White catch a ton of passes. Todd Bowles seems to really like him. Rachaad White had, of course, a top 6 scoring season 2 years ago. But there's a huge Sean Tucker hive out there. I have some exposure to Sean Tucker, a sort of a hedging the bet thing here. I would still be on Rachaad White as the best bet to have more production if Bucky misses time. Where are you at on this one? It's worth talking about just because of the steam right now with Tucker.
Yes. I will admit I'm taking my lead from other analysts when it comes to this take, but we are going to probably, assuming Irving misses, we're going to find out which of the 2 things they're going to do. Are they going to just elevate Rachaad White and then elevate Sean Tucker, and White is Bucky Irving now and Tucker is Rachaad White now? Or do they just flip the 2? Or to put it another way, White stays in his sort of secondary role and Tucker moves in to where Irving was? And I think that that's probably what makes more sense. So last night was waivers, and Arizona is a similar situation with Trey Benson and, of course, Connor being hurt. Which way do they go for this? It's probably a split. They might need a game to figure out how they want to do this, or same with the Cardinals, how they want to break it up. DeMercado and Michael Carter. So my bet last night and in general would be on Tucker and on Carter, thinking that they have more potential to be the running back 1 on their team. It's a little bit of a slight on White, though, who's been that for Tampa Bay already and didn't do so badly. So I guess we'll see. I mean, Rachaad White wasn't really available last night, and Tucker largely was. So I couldn't bid on Rachaad White, even if I wanted to. That could go either way. I'd be careful. This isn't saying much, but assuming anything when it comes to these teams, because they really could play it. We've been burned lots of times through the years when the starting running back goes down, and we sort of we might assume that the Alexander Madisons of the world are just going to be the same. And then we end up, or Ty Chandler to stay with the Minnesota example, and we just end up getting beat. But I think there's potential for any of those guys.
Sean Tucker is almost like a mythical idea at this point, where was such a baller at Syracuse, and then we had that crazy RB1 overall week. So yeah, I'm into it. I think that like I added a good deal of Tucker last night, and it was very weird, Mike, because in some leagues he went for a lot, and some leagues he was reasonable. In a couple of leagues, I felt like I was bidding against myself, and then in other leagues, I was short on the fab bid. So I'm into it. I think my bet would still be on Rachaad White. It could be a little bit of a game flow situation as well, where if Tampa Bay's in a situation where they have to pass a lot in weeks that Irving misses, you're going to see White put up really, really good numbers. If they're in the lead, maybe they lean on Sean Tucker, his explosiveness in the running game. So I think they're both very talented, and Tampa Bay certainly has a great offensive ecosystem around Baker Mayfield with great running back depth, and I think that they'll be really not just able to tread water. I think they can have not quite the same element of Bucky Irving, but they'll have 85. They'll Billy Bean it. They'll get 85% of Bucky Irving with guys that were on their bench. So that's an interesting one.
You and I are in a league together, by the way. I just was checking the bids last night. I bid big on Michael Carter. You bid on Isaiah Davis, and we each could have had Tucker for less. He went for, I think, 88. I was in the mood to spend money because it's, week 5 now and we got to spend it, but still.
Yeah, I probably should have pivoted to more Tucker there. It's for me, Isaiah Davis, there's just a lot to like with that profile. Sure. I added a ton of Isaiah Davis because Braylon Allen now headed to the IR. Davis was really productive as collegiate. I think he's more of a like-for-like replacement for Breece Hall. And just the way this offense is going, I think Davis is going to be pretty productive in this RB2 role. They're going to need to use him. We saw them trying to establish Braylon Allen against Miami. So, yeah, there we go. I'm an Isaiah Davis guy. We didn't talk about it much on the pod. One other guy to pick your brain on, Malik Washington, who now has a big opportunity as sort of – and this is a player that there was a lot of people this summer in Dynasty circles sort of pounding the table for him and his contingent upside if Tyreek Hill was traded. Well, we didn't get the trade, but we got a season-ending injury. Malik Washington, mega productive at UVA, and then fell to day 3 because of injury concerns. He's good. He was when I say mega productive, he had the most receptions in ACC history in a single season, the most receiving yards in UVA history in a single season, and just went nuts. He was like 50% of their entire offense. Thoughts on Washington with his opportunity?
I think there's a lot of potential here. You kind of already said it. He had a role already before Tyreek Hill went down. I mean, he was getting some valuable touches, and they were definitely not afraid to use him. Jonnu Smith being moved out of there. Nobody can ever name a tight end on that team anymore once he's gone. And what the conversation or the discourse around the Dolphins was mostly just like Hill and Waddle and Achane, and that's it. And this year they've shown that they like Washington, and now obviously there's a chance for him to do a lot more. So he would be an ad for sure. No reason not to like sort of the basic factors on him: opportunity, age, talent. It feels like it's all good.
And there's a chance, and I'm going to put a non-zero chance on this one. I'm not saying that this is the probable outcome, but I think that there is a chance that Malik Washington outscores Jalen Waddle rest of the season. I think Waddle we makes, and it just, Mike, it's just sort of the eye test here where you saw Waddle and he had a pretty productive game against Buffalo, but it's the explosive element just doesn't seem to be there with Waddle, what we saw when he was a younger player. Whereas Washington, every time he touches the ball, it looks like he's thinking about getting to the end zone, and he's got like a ton of juice with the ball in his hands. It's sort of an eye test thing where you'd see it with athletes where it's like sort of it's that X factor that Washington has. And you can tell with the manufactured rushing attempts that Miami gives him.
Right. I like Waddle. Can he hold up? If they increase his target share, I mean, he's not Puka. He's not somebody that just is this physical force that, Puka gets hurt, but still Waddle, it seems like there's once a game or so where you wonder if he's injured and what that's going to be. So I don't know how well conditioned he is to take on a bigger share of that offense, which makes it even, more possible that Washington is the one. Yeah. And, he's probably, what did he go for last night? Not a lot. So if you have a chance to get him, you should.
Yeah, it's another player that I bid against myself on. And Mike, it's sort of a funny thing in fantasy. I have so many Malik Washington teams where I have tons of good options at wide receiver, and then a bunch of teams where I'm in wide receiver hell, where I would literally give up my pinky finger to have exposure to Malik Washington right now. So just a funny way that fantasy football works. Mike, I ask a lot of guests this throughout the summertime and throughout the regular season. Give us a bold prediction for I'll give you, you can do for week 5, you can do for the rest of the season. Dealer's choice for you.
This is always the hardest part for me because I'm not a hot take guy. Like I sort of have to ask myself, I think is that actually hot? What is it? But I feel like I want to say a thing that would probably have to qualify as hot, whether it's fantasy wise or just in general. I wouldn't be completely closed to the possibility that the Browns make the playoffs. The defense is great. Gabriel might be okay. He might be good. He almost has to be an upgrade over what they were getting. Judkins is rolling. And if it happens to be Isaiah Bond, then it is. I mean, Tillman is out. They're not even really using Njoku. And that's also something that could, shape itself either, or maybe he gets moved if they are going to be sort of a last place team. But if you look at the AFC, I feel like there's room for somebody that we're all discounting to make it. Cincinnati is bad. Baltimore might even be bad, shockingly. Houston is maybe bad. Like the AFC East outside of the Bills is maybe bad. Like there's the chance that there's a team that can make a move. And, if it's all rookies with the Browns, Gabriel, Judkins, Sampson, Fannin, Bond, then okay. I think that they're like kind of the opposite of fun, but they might become fun. How's that?
I mean, that's definitely a spicy one. I don't think anybody is factoring in that. We saw what Green Bay was capable of in that Green Bay game, or excuse me, what Cleveland was capable of in that Green Bay game with that defense. And yeah, the division has just become much easier for them. It could be really crazy that if they miss the playoffs because they weren't able to beat Cincinnati in that 1-point loss. But they've certainly have the horses, and they love the young players there. They're going to see what they got out of it, where it's so funny how the narrative has changed, where there was a lot of criticism for them moving off the chance to draft a potential superstar like Travis Hunter. But now if you look at Cleveland, Fannin looks like a hit. Judkins is a massive hit. They've had a bunch of these rookies firing off. Isaiah Bond they signed as an undrafted free agent, and Cleveland now has those 2 first-round picks. I think it's unbelievable just how good that defense could be. If Gabriel gives them a little bit of stability and just doesn't turn the ball over, then I think they've got a chance to do what you said. And Mike, maybe you get an opportunity for your Buffalo Bills in sort of the battle for Lake Erie game, where you'd probably win that game by about 30. So I think Bills fans would take Cleveland in the first. Hey, nothing wrong with that one too.
They play in week 16, by the way. So we'll see. Like Gabriel gets Brian Flores as his first assignment in England. Like that's probably not perfect, but Pittsburgh ran on Minnesota. Judkins can do that.
And Minnesota also down 4 offensive linemen this week. So you could see Cleveland sort of impose their will against Carson Wentz. Maybe this is the game where the bottom falls out completely. We saw some of the bad side of Carson Wentz last week. Wentz, of course, does have 2 touchdown passes again. Maybe this is the week where it completely falls out from under him. There's a reason Carson Wentz was relegated to the bench, and the reason we were kind of surprised to see him starting NFL games again. And hey, maybe reality sets in this week. Mike, this was awesome today. Let everybody know once again what you have going on throughout the week.
My show in Buffalo is 3 to 7 Eastern each weekday. I'm on after Bills games when they're not playing at night. So I won't be on. I'll be at the game with my son Sunday night, but not on the air. Yep. So Monday through Friday on the Odyssey app, AUDACY. It's free. You can listen every day. ADP Chasing is back next Tuesday. We're going to do the first Tuesday of each month and let the guys at Stat Chasing take over the weekly as they've done since the season started. Tuesday, Wednesday, midweek. So there's that. I'm doing Purple Insider with Matt Collar each week. He and I are about to record in a few minutes, focused on the Vikings. I'll be on Fantasy Life tonight, but I think this will drop tomorrow, so that'll be too late. You've missed that one.
Awesome.
And driving my kids everywhere.
Mike, you are everywhere. Highly recommend following Mike and checking out all of his great podcasting. Really, really a fun one today, Mike. We're going to see you soon. Make sure you check out the updated Dynasty rankings over at Fantasy Points. I put way too much time into them. You can get access to all of our Dynasty rankings, all of our tools, any package that we have over at Fantasy Points. You can get 15% off using the code Theo. Make sure you check that one out and tune into Dynasty Life every single week. We're going to help you crush your Dynasty leagues this season.